Why is it that true change comes only from within? Human rights advocate Molly Melching knows from experience. She'll explain next on Global Perspectives.
This is Global Perspectives with Pulitzer Prize-winning commentator John Bercia.
Welcome to Global Perspectives. What inspires a young woman to move from the Midwest to Senegal and to stay? The story of women's rights champion Molly Melching and her organization Tostan provides the answer. Welcome to the show, Molly.
Thank you.
So tell us, what did inspire you to move from the Midwest to Senegal, and why Senegal?
The reason I moved to Senegal, actually, it wasn't a move, it was an exchange program that was only supposed to last for 6 months. And that 6 months turned into 41 years. So I went originally as an exchange student from the University of Illinois, and I went to the University of Dakar to work on my master's degree. And I loved it so much there. And I liked the people, and I realized also that maybe I could make a contribution while I stayed in Senegal. There was so much that I felt needed to be done in terms of children. At first, I realized children didn't have books to read that were adapted to Senegal, and I was very interested in children at that time and started working with them and writing books for children and getting Africans to write books also, to do pictures, and we even opened a children's center. And it was just very exciting. I then joined the Peace Corps to be able to do this work, and then got a grant from the Spencer Foundation in Chicago, which helped me to keep that center open for 6 years. So that's how I started, and then it grew. We moved on from the center, the Children's Center, to a village.
So tell us, at the very beginning, it almost didn't happen because of a funding issue.
It almost didn't happen, and I always feel like, was this destiny or what? Because there were a lot of problems in getting over to the university. At that time, there was no email, not even faxes. So actually, the day I arrived in Senegal, they had sent a telegram that very day to tell me not to come. And I just thank God that that didn't happen, and that I arrived and I said, I'm here and I love it here and I don't want to leave. So please let us make this work. And I worked with the Ministry of Education, and there was a Senegalese who went to the University of Illinois in my place and took my teaching assistant. And I got a scholarship at the University of Dakar. I took his scholarship, and I was able to stay to study to get my master's at the University of Dakar and at the University of Illinois at the same time.
Now, it sounds like this was a place you fell in love with from the first second, and most of us don't have that experience. What is it like to feel perfectly at home right after arriving somewhere?
I think I got off the plane and there was no one there to meet me because they thought they had canceled the program. And so I sat at the airport and I thought, I'm not even scared, I'm not even worried. People were so friendly, they were so kind. And I watched everybody and I thought, I love the way they move and the flowing boo-boos they wear, the African robes that they wear, the women, the men, they're so friendly to one another. They touch, they greet. Everybody just seemed to move so gracefully and joyfully. And I thought, I would like to know more about this place and what makes it tick. And I really can't wait to learn more. And then I thought that because I spoke French, that I would have no problem communicating with people. And it turns out that after I had been there for a while, a lot of the people I really wanted to talk to and learn from did not speak French. They spoke the national language. Most spoke Wolof in Dakar. And it was really when I learned Wolof and started speaking Wolof that I began to learn about the culture, about why people did what they were doing, and really started understanding some of the cultural misunderstandings I had had when I first arrived. And it was fascinating. It was a whole new worldview for me. And I thought, I want to deepen my knowledge of this language and of the culture. I loved working with the children. And then eventually, when I moved to the village, working with people who unfortunately had no access to education. And I thought, what a shame, because I saw so many health problems, for example, that could have easily been avoided if they had had the information they needed. Just to give you an example, many of the children had diarrhea, which turned into dehydration, and often the women would use traditional remedies. They would go to see the traditional healer or to their religious leader and ask for amulets, and they would not give them the oral rehydration solution. And I saw children die. And I thought this could all be avoided if they just had the information they needed in their own language. In the village, no one had ever been to school. So they needed this information desperately. I think it was so incredible that there hadn't been this type of education beforehand. And that is why, with the community, we started together an education program that really responded to their needs and their priorities.
How did you prioritize? Did you have a list of issues in your mind that you felt needed addressing, or did you develop such a list after consulting with the people who lived there? How did you come to prioritize?
I listened. Luckily, I spoke Wolof by the time I went to the community. And because I spoke Wolof, I could talk to the people and ask them, what are your goals and what are your objectives for the community? And we would hold meetings and discuss this. And they would talk about what they saw as their problems and what they felt they needed to know and to understand, what skills they needed to learn. For example, they wanted desperately to learn to read and write. They felt like this would help them a lot in being able to better manage projects that would come into the community. Because we had seen in nearby villages that projects came in and often failed. I often said I saw a cemetery of projects. Good-intentioned people who came in and brought health centers, and they brought wells and millet machines that broke down 6 months later. And the women were always so sad because, of course, they needed these millet machines, these grinding machines that saved them so much time in pounding the millet that they did every day for 2 hours. But they had not really been prepared to manage this millet machine, to manage their own development, really. They didn't know how to read and write, and this was important for keeping track of what the expenses were, what came in, the money that came in from using the machine. And I thought, wow, this is kind of simple. If we could build on their strengths, what they already know and what they already do well, and give new information in their own language. You know, I felt like people could just flourish, and then they would be able to lead their own development. They could say, this is what we need, this is how we need to do it, this is who will manage it, and we will be the ones that decide even on what are the projects that are most important to us, because we have to together determine what our goals are.
How quickly did Tostan come together? Was that very, very early on, or did it take a bit of time?
It grew because the reason that we even created the organization of Tostan was because as we worked with this one community and saw amazing results, people decided we need better health. And together we looked at what could help bring better health in the community. And they started contributing money to organizing a health table, just a table where they would get basic health care, medicines, and they started seeing that this was really powerful in terms of avoiding malaria and avoiding infection from wounds they would get from working in the fields, that they would often have to pay a lot of money to have treated. And they started seeing that this was great to organize, and then they actually said, let's build a health center, which they did. And they started a garden on their own, and together we worked on writing a project in Wolof. And we have submitted it to a self-help fund, and we're financed for that, and they were thrilled. And so I saw them realize that they themselves could, through very small learning, really lead to some very important activities that were leading to better health and well-being in the community. As we did that, we started sharing our materials that we were developing with other communities and with other organizations. And people actually started asking me and the team of Senegalese who were working in this village and the villagers to go and share this with other people in other regions. And we saw that it wasn't just for the Wolof, but the other ethnic groups also. The Pular, the Mandenkas, the Soninkes, they all were responding to this education, learning about basic information that would help them to make decisions about health and income-generating activities. And that's when I met UNICEF. And actually, UNICEF was very excited when they saw the work we were doing, because they had seen many projects fail. And they said, really what they felt was lacking also was community preparation, because people just had not gone to school. They had not had a basic education. And again, I think that it's important to note that the education we were using was an education in their mother tongue. A lot of kids in Senegal go to school and they learn in French, and they've never heard French at home. And they go to school and they're expected to start learning to read and write in French and learn math. And it's hard. They'd never heard this before. And actually, they'd never even seen books in their homes in the village before. And you can imagine, many of the children were failing. And I realized early on, I was very lucky to realize that when you learn in your own mother tongue and you start working on education for adults, you can just go so far, and you can change all the conditions in the community, health, the environment, even the governance issues. Women were not participating before this education program. And suddenly, in our classes, as we started organizing, they began having more confidence. And again, we actually started using human rights education, which was very powerful after several years of working in the education field. We realized that a lot of problems came about because people did not know their human rights and responsibilities. When we added that to the program, then the women really took off. They had much greater confidence. They knew they had the right to speak out. They knew they had the right to health. They had the right to be free from all forms of discrimination. And it was exciting to see what happened after we added the human rights to the education program. And because of the results we were having in the field, UNICEF said, we cannot hire you as consultants anymore. You need to organize into a non-governmental organization so that we can fund your organization. And quite frankly, that is the reason that I decided to create Tostan. And Tostan was founded in 1991. It is a 501c3. I came back to America because it was much easier to create the organization from here in America, and then we were immediately recognized in Senegal as a Senegalese organization. And the fact is that we were funded by UNICEF for many years, and then started receiving funds from others, from foundations and from other government, from USAID, from Sweden, from Norway, as people started seeing the results in the field from this basic education that was really adapted more to the needs and priorities of the people in the communities.
I'm guessing at times in your efforts to educate and encourage change, you ran into challenges from practices that had been in place for a long time that were part of tradition, that were part of culture. How did you deal with those?
Those issues we ran into in the field, and particularly when we were developing a module on women's health. And there were many issues that came up that were very sensitive and even taboo that people did not want to even touch or talk about. And one of those was female genital cutting. And female genital cutting, I think you know, is a practice that goes on in African countries that is shocking in a way to many Americans who don't know about it or just hear about it, because it does involve the cutting of an organ of the woman's body. And there are different types. There are some that are more severe than others. And in Senegal, it is practiced within certain ethnic groups. And within those ethnic groups, it was practiced almost 100%. And when we were doing participatory research for the Women's Health module, we found that women wanted to know more. What is this? What does this involve? And I felt maybe we should not approach these issues because I'm not of this culture and these are so sensitive, and I know that people feel very, very strongly about this. But the women in the program and the women on our staff who we were working with at the time, they said to me, Molly, you're not Tostan. We are Tostan, and we want to do this. We want to know. And the women want to know. You can't tell us to stop. And I said, okay, if you say so. But I was worried, quite frankly. I knew that this was a sensitive issue. So then the women, when they learned about this in our modules, we actually put sessions on this in the modules. They learned their human rights to health, their responsibility in relation to their daughters. If something happens to their daughters, which is their fault, it is really their responsibility. And they started thinking about all these issues, and they themselves, we never, in the sessions, ever asked people to stop. And I think it's really interesting because the reason I believe people felt they could stop is because we said, you are smart. Once you have this information and you know what is involved, you will make the right decision. So I was more surprised than anyone when the women decided on their own. They went to the men, they talked to the religious leaders, they asked if this practice was in the Quran. They found out it was not. They didn't know this. They thought it was a religious practice. And they decided to stand up and abandon. And since that first village that actually abandoned, it's called Malikunda Bambara, in 1997, 7,400 communities in 8 West African and East African countries have abandoned after going through the program, reaching out to the rest of their family, their extended family, to bring them on board, because you cannot abandon this tradition alone. You have to include your whole family because it is critical for marriage. Before, with the practice, you had to have gone through female genital cutting in order to be respected, to have a good reputation, and to have a good husband. And if you don't, any good mother would never dream of not cutting her daughter. So in order to abandon, you have to be sure that the whole family agrees and comes together. And this is what Tostan has allowed people to do, to learn the information, first of all, to come together as a united family, to decide and then abandon as a united family, come to consensus that tomorrow we are not going to do this anymore. And none of the daughters will be harmed by this. They will have husbands. The men will agree to marry them, even though they're not cut, and then they can abandon safely. And so we learned so much from listening. It was the villagers who taught us this. They were the ones who said, you know, you must abandon with a whole social network. We've really looked at what the deeper values of the culture are and have tried to show and explain to people that this is to reinforce those values. We're not bringing in Western values necessarily. Their values of unity and family and well-being and peace, which is so important in the countries in West Africa where we work, that they should really look at practices and decide themselves which are the practices which will lead to health and well-being and peace, which are their deeper values. And that is really what has gotten them to think about those harmful practices and in the end decide as a family with unity to abandon.
So I'm wondering, the sub-Saharan Africa you first visited in the 1970s is not the sub-Saharan Africa of today, with radicalism, greater or lesser threat in certain areas. Does the spread of radicalism threaten the progress with this issue and with others?
I think it points out the need for programs like our program, which is a human rights approach. One of the best things we've ever done is to early on realize how important it is to work with the men, with the village chiefs, and with the religious leaders. You know, often people say to me, oh, you must have the religious leaders who oppose what you're doing, because Senegal is 94% Muslim. And I say, you know, it's just the contrary. Because we include them and even ask them to be part of this movement, not just to be part of it, but to lead this movement. Because they are very influential. And so we have taken the time to do trainings for them that could last 5 days, where they really look at the values that are involved with human rights and the verses in the Quran that reinforce and go along with those values, and discuss it openly and listen to the women who talk about the harm it has caused. And because they know that Islam is really in favor of health and promotes health among the society, they realize, oh my gosh, we just really didn't realize what this was about. And this is not in the Quran. And they have become the leaders of this movement, and not only to end FGC, but for many other issues: violence against girls and women, education. And they are very confident, and I believe very strongly that education is what is really lacking in a lot of West Africa. And unfortunately, there isn't as much education as there should be. I'm trying to promote everywhere grassroots education in people's own language with a human rights approach, an empowering education program that gives people the confidence to stand up against fundamentalism and radicalization. And this is what's happening, because people who have been through these programs for education and empowerment programs are rejecting this way of doing things. And it also, through the program, gives them new opportunities to work, to start income-generating activities. Because so much of this radicalization comes from frustration from the young people who see no future ahead for them. And with a program like this, I really believe it helps people to aspire to a whole other life that they had really not deemed possible before.
Tell us briefly about your book. Obviously, it tells your story, but what is the most important piece that it adds to your story?
I think the book was important because a lot of people felt like they just didn't understand at all how I could be in Africa, first of all, and including my mother, who kept saying, "What are you doing over there?" And other people who really didn't quite get what was going on in the program and how this was affecting people so strongly. And the book really has helped, I think, to explain why I am doing what I'm doing, and the fact that I'm not trying to save the world. I never had that intention at all. I went to Senegal and I stayed because I loved it. And I felt like I was learning a lot about how to become more human, because people in Senegal are wonderful human beings and they really care about one another, and family is important, and peace and welcoming people. It's beautiful. And I feel like sometimes we've lost that here in America, and that we could learn so much from Africa. And so I feel like I was the one who gained. But if at the same time I was able to contribute, it's sort of a reciprocal relationship. And I think that through the book, perhaps people understand this. This is not about somebody, who went out to change the world. I didn't. I was more surprised than anyone to see all of this happen. And I said, okay, I'll do whatever I can to support these amazing people, these villagers who had never had this opportunity because they'd never been to school, and yet were so intelligent, so wise, and yet could not really, sort of let loose and realize their full potential. And seeing that is very exciting. And I think the book expresses that, and it allows people to understand why I'm doing what I'm doing. And also, I'm happy that it shows and throws a light on these people at the grassroots who are leading this amazing movement for change.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today, Molly Melching.
Thank you.
And thank you. For Global Perspectives, I'm John Bercia. We'll see you next time.